24th of August, 2024 at 11:40 a.m. here on Harstine Island, Washington, United States of America. Welcome once again to our Cosmic Journey, the Dev and Design podcast, charting the path between the lowly designer and lowly dev in making the world's best astrology software. I am designer Jake. He is engineer. You're that way. Engineer Trey. Hello, Trey.
Hello, Jake.
We didn't have a couple takes where I messed it up. This was just fine. Everything was fine.
And I had nothing to do with you messing them up.
No, you did fine. This is going to probably be the theme of the episode, that you're doing fine. It's me that's actually having the problems right now. A little rainy, a little cold here in Washington State. It's kind of been a little bit of a welcome, a little bit of a welcome reprieve from some of the stifling heat here. It's really like Virgo coming in, being like, I am the mutable summer. It is coming to an end. It's a nice reminder. How are you feeling about the weather right now?
I hate all of that. I like the sunny, warm, and it has been raining nonstop for days.
Yeah.
And it's actually genuinely chilly today, which is why I'm wearing this hat.
Yeah, no, and my feetsies are cold.
It is good for all of the trees and the plants and everything because they are loving it.
They were looking.
Day. Also, the giant Pacific Northwest slugs are all out in force, which I love. They're huge banana slugs.
Yeah, the unofficial mascot of the Pacific Northwest, the huge slugs, are out in full force. There's one slug that I almost step on every single day when I go to walk our dog. But you know what?
Yeah, likes to hang out on the path. Also, we have like all of these beautiful, we'll probably get another whole harvest out of like the huckleberries and the blackberries in the yard. Since it's raining, it's going to get sunny again later in the week, so we'll probably get like a whole nother.
Oh yeah, it's going to explode with verdancy yet again. I guarantee it. This episode is called New Perspectives. It's episode 49. I have a check-in today, and we're going to talk a little bit about what makes perspective so dang hard. Trey has a dev demo of the perspective model, and then we have some reflections about podcast that we recently did that we'll talk a little bit about. But before we get into that, let us now go to the check-in. We're just talking about slugs and how the slugs are coming out because of all of the wet weather. I would love to know, Mr. Henry, what kind of trail do you leave behind in your wake when imposing yourself upon this world and this universe? What is your either maybe it's your physical, or maybe it is your more ethereal trail that you leave behind?
Yeah, good question. I think it's got to be a trail of weird tech projects that have of various states of completion. So there's sort of like a lot of noodling around with things, trying things out, like little projects here and there that I'm like, oh, this is something cool that I should do, and maybe I'll get like 10% of the way into it and be like, I'm over it. So there's just like a trail of just like unfinished tech projects.
Yeah, that's true. There's you only have digital cruft and digital detritus to deal with.
The detritus is not physical.
Yeah, I think the trail that I leave behind, I have this habit now where I'm reading. I promised myself I would only read 3 books at a time, and then I went up to 5 books, and then I went up to like 7 books. And what I do now is I stack the books one on top of the other, and then I pick that up and I read a chapter and I put it to the bottom and I pick up the next book and read a chapter. And sometimes I shuffle the books. And the reason that I do that, and I actually really enjoy that, is because I like making connections between things that are seemingly disparate. So I've been making a lot of connections between therapeutic assessment and the tooling around therapeutic assessment, and that as a discussion point for therapy, and astrology. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we go into the podcast part of the episode, and like when we talk about our reflections of the podcast. But I really like this. I think the trail that I leave behind is weird connections between seemingly disparate things because of the types of literature and the order in which I read literature. I'm always trying to like chance it so that I find something interesting and new when it comes to reading literature. I think that's what I I have a different legacy that I'll probably leave behind, but that's the slimy trail, I think, that most people can see right away. So next, what we wanted to talk about was the use of perspectives and we've been talking a lot about like the implementation of perspectives and what makes perspectives difficult to implement. We wanted to go in a little bit more detail about like why this is so dang hard and what we're doing about it from a design perspective. And then what Trey's going to show later is what we're doing from the tech model perspective. Point of view, I should say. So let's jump into my slides. There are three things that we think that astrologists or practicing astrologists or enthusiasts want to do. They want to have a way to either show or express their aesthetics or personal preferences in astrology. This is like, what glyphs do I want to see for Pluto? Whether chart rotation is turned on or off. These are very much basic settings that you would expect in an astrology app. But beyond those basic settings, there is the desire to show my practice preferences in astrology. So this is the most important stuff. What house system do I use? What's my preferred rulership scheme? How do I calculate orb? Whether I want to see things like signs, decans, terms. The third thing that I want is a way to show, like to focus down my chart or my rings on what's most important. So if I'm doing horary astrology, I might want to only focus on Jupiter if we're talking about ninth house significations and that ninth house is sitting in Sagittarius. Or maybe it's only the transits that are hitting the benefics. If I'm into financial astrology, really what I'm looking for is it's Pluto, Jupiter, and the Sun, right? Those are the three things that financial astrologer Morris was interested in. Anyways, there's lots of different reasons why I would want to have lots of varied settings. And the way in which most astrology software does this today is, like I said, through settings. So here's the way in which I choose my glyphs. And then on a different tab, here is the immense way that I show the practice of astrology. And if you upgrade, sometimes you lose a bunch of settings and you have to redo settings. That sucks, and people hate that. And when it's really bad, you have whole videos that are set up that are purely about how to set up software. This all makes sense. Like if you think of yourself as an island, right? You install software, you set it all up, and you go. But very rarely in astrology are you an island. You're either pulling in other people's databases or you're doing references to different things. And so when you start branching out from yourself into other things, you start running into big time problems. So let's say you're doing, Mr. Henry, you're doing research and want to pull lots of charts from prominent people to study. You're into it, you love it. So the first thing you do is you get a database of charts. Well, the problem now is because you bake in preferences, now all you're doing is you took this whole database and now you have to readjust one by one each of these charts to correspond to the correct astrology preferences. And that sucks. So in Astrodienst, you get around this in a very funny way where like they've got different links for different house systems or like different astrology types. But if Trey uses moiety in calculating, or because he's very much a kind of Arabic Renaissance astrologer, like that's still like these things are baked way into the chart. It's hard to manage and hard to deal with. So the way in which what we've thought about this is, wouldn't it be nice if instead of having to watch videos to follow along recreating settings, that the settings were portable? So if I grab Benjamin Dyke's chart for something, not only am I seeing the chart that he created, but also all the settings come along. But if I want to use my settings instead of Benjamin Dykes' settings, I have a way in which I can say, you know what, I can look at how Benjamin Dykes sets things up, or I can do it my way. And if I want to save it as a default, I can save it as default because I really respect that astrologer, or I can use my defaults instead. And so the idea is that settings are portable to the type of astrology and the choices that the astrologer makes, and you can choose to either take on those settings and make it very easy for you to set up your software, or use your own settings. And to that, Trey has spent a lot of time this iteration working through the model of what the perspective was going to look and feel like within code. He's going to, I think what you're going to do now is give us a little bit of an overview of what that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
This is kind of the output of Jake's design, and also like probably almost 2 solid days of talking through this. It was actually towards the end of the second day of talking through this where both Jake and I were like, I can't talk about perspectives anymore.
Correct.
It was just too much. So we've talked about perspectives quite a bit in the past, and I've mentioned that we had an implementation for perspectives, but we always knew that it was not complete. We had kind of moved in the direction that we wanted to move in, but we had never actually gone through the entire process of sort of designing the entire thing. And now that we have, what I wanted to show here, so Jake was talking about those sort of the 3 things that the perspective sort of represents in Cosmic. One being sort of like the user's aesthetic choices and things like that, which would normally be called like user preferences. And so we have these, by the way, are not in any way complete. This is just showing sort of the high level model for perspectives now. So we have this kind of user object in our system, and the user is related to the perspective. That is the user's perspective, which contains this sort of aesthetic information, essentially. Then we have charts, and then we have chart perspectives, which is a relationship between the actual chart itself and the perspective. The type of relationship is a many-to-many. Don't worry about the details here, but basically it allows us to say that an individual chart can have many different perspectives that can be used to represent it, to display it on the screen. And each of those perspectives are associated with the user. So like one chart that is maybe shared between Jake and I, Jake could have his perspective for it, I could have my perspective for it, and this is how in the model we allow for the implementation that Jake was just showing, where there's a drop down there where you could say like, yeah, use the one that was with the chart, or I want to set that as my default, or whatever. So this is the relationship between chart and perspective. And then we have what we used to call chart data, which is now being renamed to ring, just to make it very clear and also align it better with the design. This is primarily what points are you showing? Like what things do you want to actually see in that ring? Do you want to see specific planets? Do you want to see specific asteroids? Do you want to see Arabic or lots? This sort of thing. So within an individual ring, what is the stuff that you want to show? And so again, it's all related to perspectives, but this is a different context of relationship between the ring and the perspective. So between these 3 things, this is how that's represented in the system. And then we have the way that perspectives work themselves, which is that a perspective is kind of just a grab bag, or it's a holding container for what we call entities, which is any sort of, like an entity might be the whole sign house system, or the Placidus house system, or it might be show zodiac. And then depending upon what of those things are associated, that's how the perspective is built. But one of the things that we added in this round is that we now also are going to support the ability to create values with entities. So in this case, you might say the entity might be, let's say you're doing more modern aspects, and so you like orb based upon the aspect. So for square or for trine, this is the orb that I use. So it might say the entity might be square aspect, and then the value might be the value for the orb of that aspect. And again, this is something where the entity itself could be like the fact that the entity is square orb. There are many people that might have different orb that they want to use for that same value. So the entity itself is one value, but the value of the orb for it can be broken down by user. So hopefully that makes sense. But the thing I just wanted to show here is like, it's building good software is hard. It's really not easy. And so anyway, we hope that users will really appreciate this. There's one more thing that I wanted to show here. So what you're looking at here is a ticket in our ticketing system, which we use GitHub projects for. And this is what we call a spike, which is a type of ticket where you break down this ticket into a bunch of smaller tickets. I had some ideas about what things needed to be discussed in order to break this ticket down. You can see here I dropped in a screenshot of the model, even though the model also lives in our docs. And then you can see here that I've broken things down into smaller tickets, and then we'll move these into cycles over the next coming little bit. So, and these will get tackled, sort of over time. But just to kind of show, I just wanted to show what our process looks like for, we create these sort of like, we need to plan refactoring for perspective and user data. And then we create this big spike ticket, and then we break that down into individual tickets. And then each of those individual tickets links back to the bigger ticket and, gets its own estimate. And then we move them into the cycles as we go. So one more thing, which I do have an actual demo in the product. So just a very small thing. You might have noticed before, I don't know if I actually pointed this out in previous episodes, but when you look at the here and now chart, even if you were logged in, the time for the chart would be in UTC and not in the local time zone for the location. There was actually an interesting reason for this, and we went back and forth on this actually, but then it sort of became clear after the implementation kind of like that it was like, okay, if we do know the location, we should just go ahead and use the time zone for the location.
Exactly.
So now you can see that it's 12:11 here, which means that we've been doing this podcast for far too long. And this is the here and now chart for.
It will be edited down significantly. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, yeah. So now it's showing the correct time zone, like by default. So a little thing, but it was nice to get at least like one thing into the product this cycle, besides like all of the planning stuff.
Very nice. Good. So finally, we were going to talk a little bit about a podcast that we did yesterday. That podcast is projected to come out sometime later. It's going to be a couple months from now when the podcast comes out, and we're excited. We have no idea whether the podcast will actually come out or not. We have no idea whether we're going to be in it or not, but if the podcast comes out and we're in it, we will let you all know that we were here to talk about astrology. Obviously, that was the subject of it. And I don't know, this is just taking a moment to, first of all, be very appreciative to the podcast hosts, which we're not going to name right now, but we'll talk about later in a future podcast. So thank you, podcast hosts. I'm sure you know who you are. We love you very much. Thank you, number one. And two, I thought that the idea of doing this podcast, certainly there's a marketing aspect to that, but also because of the questions we were being asked, it allowed us, or kind of forced us, to think very deeply about like what cosmic plumbing is, what we are doing, and how it is different. And I felt like that time that was forced to reflect around who we are and what we're doing and why we're doing it was very helpful to me. And I really enjoyed that, and I really appreciated that as part of this podcast. And hopefully that comes through in the episode, if it comes out and if we're in it. I'm wondering from you, Trey, what did you either appreciate or maybe find challenging about this podcast episode that you did with me?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The thing that I really got out of it that was like a meta benefit, I guess, is the having to hone in on. I think we have an innate sense of what we're doing and why, but until you actually have to express that in words and really hone in that message, it's kind of this amorphous thing that's like, yeah, of course we're making the world's best astrology software. Well, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And
For
so then
who?
You have to kind of like,
when?
Yeah.
Why? Yes, these are the things.
And so it's a fun thing to try to figure out, because there's all of the ways that we overlap on what we're doing and why, and then there are the sort of individual, like Jake's perspective on things and Trey's perspective on things, and this really gave us a chance to kind of like really hone that center and then also provide the right context for the individual sort of perspectives. Dang it. We've ruined that word.
No, to say point of view from now on.
Point of
That's
view.
what I've been doing.
So anyway,
we'll see.
Yeah, I basically what you said.
Yeah, we'll see as time moves on if we keep honing this point of view on what this company is, who we're doing it for. We feel pretty good about it. We're not going to go into great detail about it today because we've already bored you enough with so much detail. So we're going to just leave you with this. Go find a way to warm up your feet. It's cold out there. Hot water bottles are great. We have a friend who has these, I don't know, they're beans of some kind, and you warm them up with the microwave, or rice, and you warm them up in the microwave, you wrap them around yourself. So go get yourself warm, go take a shower, maybe get yourself warm, read a book, have yourself a beautiful and lovely Saturday, or whatever day you watch this episode. We love you very much, and we're looking forward to seeing you again in the future. Goodbye.
Bye.